Okay, we got our GFS 10 fuel sensor. Let's see what's in the box. This is not for use with diesel engines. Looks like the sensor. NMEA 2000 backbone. This is for if you're going with an 0183 system. Have our mounting bracket, fuel line clamps, zip ties, and plug-in adapters, and we have our inline fuel filter. Then instructions and more instructions. So let's see this. Okay. There's our sensor. And this goes to our NMEA 2000 network. And then here's your wires. Orange is usually power. Red and white has a fuse, so that's got to be, maybe orange is ignition, black is ground. But one of these two goes to the sending unit for the fuel gauge. So pretty simple, not a lot in this. So hopefully it remains simple. Okay, here we go. So the orange wire stays unconnected because I have an NMEA 2000 network. The brown wire goes to the fuel tank sensor. Gray goes to the ignition switch. Black and white is ground, and red is power. Alright, easy enough. And then, since we're here, have the bracket, and then that goes, according to this, that, and then that sits somewhat like that, like that. Think like this. Oh. Like this. Alright, we got it. So this is where our fuel pickup is, and then it just has a short trip to the motor. But I'm getting a new engine put in, a bigger one, and the fuel pickup on it is on the other side of the motor. So that's something I have to consider. Also, there's two lines coming off of here. One is the NMEA 2000 network cable, and that one is going to hook up back there where my network is. The other cable goes up to the helm and connects to everything up there. So I'm hoping to get lucky and have it be long enough that it can run from back here to the back of the boat, across, and all the way along there and up to the helm. So I'm going to run some cables and see how it looks. Okay, so what I did is I hooked up my NMEA 2000 cable so that I could kind of get an idea for how far it'd reach. So that'd come along there and make a turn that way. It's not going to go to where I can mount. And by turning, it's not going to be where I can mount it properly. So I'm going to mount over on this side so that it's closer to the fuel pickup on the new motor. And my concern was that I wouldn't have enough cable going up to the dashboard. So I ran it on this side of the motor, but now that I'm up here, I can see that I have plenty of cable extra, so I can pull some back. And instead of running it this way along the motor, I can run it over the back and then down to here. Okay, we have our cable set in place. Okay, so take out our fuel filter. Let's grab my floorboard here. So we have to make sure and get our flow correct. And we have to have our filter in line. So those on this is going to be pretty close. So bought new fuel line, so we're going to start all brand new. Garmin sends 4 hose clamps. I can't remember exactly which law it is, but on some marine applications you have to have 2 hose clamps per fitting, and this isn't one of them. Go ahead and push this on. Put our hose clamps on. Flow going that way. And we'll tighten these up. Now, the reason that I made sure these were pointing this direction is because our bracket goes right here. So that means that the this point has to be pointing upwards. Okay, we're going to disconnect the old fuel lines. and see how much fuel we have. We're almost full. And now we can turn the batteries to off. Before I pull that fuel line, I'm going to crank the front of the boat down. Now, the front of the boat is leading down, and hopefully the fuel is sitting at the front of the boat and not back here where my fuel lines hook up. Okay, well, fuel didn't come pouring out. That's a good sign. Okay, so I looked at mounting it over here a bunch of ways. Up there, up there. Problem is about mounting it to the side here. Have some aggressive bends in the plumbing, in the fuel tube. So I didn't want to do that. I also, I don't know if I can see it, but there's these metal braces here that I could have mounted to, but they're getting awful close to the side, so it would have been some pretty aggressive bends in the plumbing. So I put the floorboard that goes back here back in, and this piece that sits in front of the motor is sitting perfect to mount that to without having any aggressive bends. Okay, so you know how it says always read these instructions fully before installing this? Yeah, I missed part of it. So up here it says install the GFS 10 as far from the engine as practical. Do not install the GFS 10 directly on the engine or where it could be subject to excessive heat or vibration. Do not install the GFS 10 between the engine and the priming bulb. When placing the GFS 10 in the fuel hose, be sure the direction of flow indicated by the arrow pointed towards the engine, and install the GFS 10 so the fuel flows in an upward direction through the GFS 10. This will prevent errors caused by air bubbles. So all this stuff I did, trying to find a good place, didn't really work. But I do have a good idea and a good place to put it. What I'm going to do is spin this around. I took it out and retaped it. I'll tighten this up and point it going this way before it was going that way. I'm going to point it going this way, and then we'll come over here to this sideboard. We're going to come from here and then come over here to this sideboard, and we'll go through the bottom up and have the fuel line come out on top, and that will place it right in here. And then it'll be properly mounted. Okay, in order to figure out where I want the fuel filter, I'm gonna mount the sensor there so that I can kind of run lines and see where I need to meet up and get some holes in this. Okay, so you might be wondering why I cut a notch instead of just drilling a hole. And the reason is because this piece, it comes out a lot for engine maintenance, stuff like that. And if I put a hole through, I'm going to have to disconnect all the fuel lines. But this way, I can just slide it out around the notches. That's why I did that. So now we just have to decide how to mount the fuel filter, and it'll be done. So I can come down through here, or I can turn this a little bit more and come through here. I think, and that'll put my fuel filter right about there. I think that's the way to go. We have our filters installed and our sensor. So now we can hook up our NMEA 2000 cable, and then we'll head to the helm. Before I forget, I've gotten in the habit of taking white electrical tape and writing on the side of it what all my cables and wires do, because when you start adding a bunch of stuff, as you can see, it can start getting confusing. I've got a couple new fuse block or bus blocks coming in, so that hopefully won't look so bad. And then I'm going to be doing digital switching, so a lot of those are going to go into the digital switch instead of right there. But labeling has shown to be very helpful. Okay, we have our wires. Red goes to power, black goes to ground, brown goes to the fuel tank sensor, and orange, since I'm using an NMEA 2000 network, this one doesn't get used, and gray goes to the ignition switch. So to do this, I'm going to take the dashboard apart more than I would normally need to for this. My fuel gauge is here, and I need to get behind it, and there's so much stuff it'd be impossible to work in there. But I have multiple projects going on. One of the projects is I'm upgrading to the Auto Trim Pro from Bennett Trim Tabs. And so that's going to go in up here, probably closer to there. So I need to get back in up here. With the new motor, I will have cruise control that's going to set on this bracket. Over here, so I'm going to need to get back into here for that. So going to do quite a bit of demolition to my dashboard to gain access. And I need to, if we look under here, all my wires are hanging down, and it's all got to be fixed up. So if I tear everything apart, it'll be a lot easier to do that in the long run. So our brown wire, I'm going to put a terminal end on, because that goes to our fuel gauge up here. The gray wire is going to stay like that because that goes to the ignition switch. Black is ground, we'll put a terminal on that. And then the red one is a power wire, and we'll use a butt connector on it. Brown goes to the fuel tank sensor. Red goes to power, we'll use a butt connector. Gray goes to the ignition switch, and orange is unused. With this orange one, we're just going to cap it off. Okay, that has power. This wire, the dealership installed to run the washdown pump. But I moved the switch to the back because that's where I use it. And what you can notice is that's not tinned wire. Most boat dealers don't use tinned wire. You're supposed to on boats. If I buy wire for my boat, I always use it. But I tried to get some footage from underneath the dashboard, but none of it worked out. So what I did is I took that gauge cluster out far enough to where I could see everything and found the codes, and right there is your fuel sending unit is number 6. Now all of these are set up different, and if you go Google the Faria gauges, they've all got a different pattern back there, but there's number 6, and so that's the one I hooked the brown wire up to get my gauge. Okay, so the first thing I do is go into a sonar tab and hit options, and then you want your transmit to be off so that you don't burn up your transducer. Then you go to settings, communications, NMEA 2000, device list, and then you're going to find GFS 10 uncalibrated, no name. Let's change the name to fuel flow sensor. Done. And it says uncalibrated. So let's hit review. Okay, so we're going to go sensor number, tank number 01, done. Engine number 1, done. Back, tank capacity, mine is 45, not 45,000, I wish. Done. Okay, from this screen, you're going to have to do multiple calibrations, telling the computer how much fuel you have in your tank as you either fill it up or drain fuel out of it. So if you've got an empty tank and you go to a gas station, you put some in, you set how much you put in, and then you keep going up. So what you'll do is you'll hit calibration, then level calibration, That's tank capacity. Level calibration, add calibration point, and then you put in. At this point I had about 90% of my tank. So I put 90%, or I put 85%. Then you hit done, and that gives you one calibration point. And since I had a full tank, what I did is I started pulling, I hooked a fuel pump up and I started putting fuel out. Okay, if we turn the key on, I got quite a bit of gas. And in order to do this, I need another setting. So what I've done is hooked up a fuel pump, and it's a 38 gallon an hour fuel pump, and when I connect power to it and we start getting some gas flowing through there, and I look at my chart plotter, fuel rate says 38.4 gallons an hour. So it seems to be working. I'm going to pump some fuel out and do another calibration. Okay, so with the key on, I've got about 90% of a tank of fuel, and I need to get one more calibration to make this work. So what I did is I started pumping fuel out so that I could calibrate it on the way down. You can either, if your tank's empty, you can add fuel to make it go up. If your tank's full, you can pull fuel out. And what you'll see when we go back to the back is that the fuel flow sensor is working. That fuel pump pumps about 38 gallons a minute is what it's rated for. And when you look at that rear thing right there, 38. And so what I did is I kept going down further and further and further. So when I got down to 3/4, I did a calibration point of 75%. Did the same thing at half a tank. And you can back out of here. You can see you have a flow rate and a fuel level. Then hit vessel and engines, and you can see in the bottom left of the screen where your gas is at 66% because of what I pulled out. Okay, well that's about the end of that project. It was actually pretty easy, a little time consuming. One thing I learned is make sure your chart plotters and all that are up to date before you start trying to program everything in. That makes it a little bit easier. But other than that, that's the end of this part of this project. I hope you learned something, or at least were able to get some pointers from my mistakes. But it's a pretty easy thing for your do-it-yourself guy.